On this episode of the Airport Economist, step inside the United Arab Emirates, a key international trade hub between East and West. Why the UAE is so much more than oil, gas and gold. As the country broadens its business horizons, learn what opportunities are ahead. It's been billed as the greatest show on earth. The Australian businesses playing a key role in Expo 2020. And from the New South Wales South Coast to the Arabian Desert, the pioneering Australian initiative that brought the University of Wollongong to Dubai. Welcome to the United Arab Emirates, the engine room of international trade for the Middle East. I'm Tim Harcourt, the Airport Economist, and we're about to take a trip from Dubai to Abu Dhabi to see the innovation, creativity and enterprise of the Gulf states. A few short decades ago, this was largely a nomadic desert society. Now it's a thriving metropolis at the centre of global trade and commerce. So let's find out why the UAE ranks so highly on the global business stage. UAE is a federation of 7 emirates. The capital is Abu Dhabi and the main commercial centre is Dubai. Its population isn't huge, just 10 million. This country is a magnet for expats. In fact, 85% of workers are on short-term visas. The UAE is something of an international trade and logistics hub with the capacity to service 3.1 million tonnes of cargo each year. Dubai's international airport is the world's busiest in terms of passengers, mainly because Dubai is the 12th most connected city globally. A third of the world's population is less than a 4-hour flight away. That global connectivity has also helped build Dubai's reputation as a tourist hotspot. A couple of hours drive away, Abu Dhabi has its own international airport. In fact, the aviation sector contributes 15% of UAE's total GDP. So why all this emphasis on being a global hub? It's about diversification away from oil and gas. The UAE holds 6% of the world's oil reserves and has the 7th largest natural gas reserves. This Gulf nation is also a big global investor thanks to the deep pockets of its sovereign wealth funds. The top 4 collectively hold about $1.3 trillion in assets under management and is a significant source of investment funds for Australia. So what are the main business opportunities here? Australia has long-standing commercial ties in a lot of sectors, including aviation, water management, education and healthcare. But the UAE's focus on innovation has opened up even more opportunities. So let's find out how the government can help Australian businesses make it here. So tell us the UAE story. Has it been a vision to become the Singapore of the Middle East?
It's very comparable, but it's been a fascinating journey from a UAE perspective. I first came here 20 years ago and there was, I think, about 1.5 million people living in the UAE. Today, there's about 10 million people, and it's just phenomenal to see the growth of the country. In 2021, they celebrate 50 years, and it's been an amazing journey. I think very early on, the rulers back in the early 70s realised that they couldn't be dependent upon oil forever, and so they really set about having very much a diversified economy and really setting Dubai up as being a regional hub across not just the GCC, but it's actually, as it's unfolding now, being a regional hub that it's going to include Africa as well.
So the UAE has been really focused on being a global hub for trade and investment.
Oh, it's fascinating to look at the diversification, Tim. I think certainly on trade, and Australia has a very strong partnership with the UAE. It's about over $7 billion of two-way trade. Also, from an investment perspective, there's about $11 billion of direct foreign investment goes back to Australia, mainly from the sovereign wealth funds that reside within the UAE. There's 3 of the top 15 sovereign wealth funds are just in the UAE alone. But I think from a UAE government perspective and business, they're moving more towards newer technologies, innovation, education. So they're wanting to really become known as a smart economy.
So when you look at the UAE, do most Australian companies set up here and then expand?
It's very convenient for Australian companies to set themselves up in Dubai and then use Dubai as then a central hub, initially to look at the GCC region. But I think I'm also talking to a number of companies now that are starting to expand the horizons across into Africa, and particularly sub-Sahara Africa.
Now, you've spent a lot of time in this region as a businessman before you joined the Australian government. What are the challenges in setting up business here?
One of the challenges I certainly see, having come out of the commercial sector, is just around cultural literacy of this region. And I think whether that be Australians having an understanding of the region or of people in this region having an understanding of the capability and the innovation that's on offer out of Australia. So I think one of our challenges that we do have collectively is how do we improve the cultural literacy of both businesses within the Middle East environment, and I'll include Africa in that cohort as well. How do we help improve their cultural literacy of Australia? And conversely, how do we help improve cultural literacy of Australia in the Middle East and Africa market? For many Australian companies, the focus has very much been on China, Southeast Asia, then the US, and then it goes to Europe, and then there's been a lot of conversation about Brexit. And unfortunately, I think sometimes Middle East and Africa sort of gets very much down the order of priorities.
So you and your team are going to have a busy few years ahead of you.
I think it's quite an exciting time. Every country has a vision of where they want to get to over the next 20 to 30 years. Probably if you went back 3 or 4 years ago, a lot of the visions that had been established, there wasn't a lot of activity taking shape. In the last couple of years, it's been quite interesting that I think there's been money invested behind the visions. It is about education, it is about innovation, it's about how do we help grow our economies, moving away from the dependency on oil, particularly in the Middle East market. But then when you look at the population growth in Africa, where it's going to go from 1.2 billion to a projected 2.5 billion over the next 20 to 30 years, then I'm suggesting to any Australian company, they should be looking at the Middle East and Africa as a region of importance into the future.
Still to come, paddock to plate. The Australian meat exporter supplying luxury hotels with quality cuts. Millions of eyes will soon be on Dubai for Expo 2020. It's been promoted as the world's greatest show and Australia will be part of it. Businesses from all over the nation will be featured in our pavilion and the state of Victoria has a big role to play. In fact, it's had an office here in Dubai for 2 decades to expand trade and investment opportunities. Let's meet the CEO of Global Victoria. So can you tell us why Global Victoria chose to be in the Middle East?
Well, I think the Victorian government recognised years ago that this was a really important market, and we always like to be first to market, and we chose to move into this region more than 20 years ago, setting up our office in 1997. We think there's some really strong complementarities between what Victoria has to offer and what we think that the region is after, but also a lot of shared learning. So we think that we can be a great support in terms of learning from each other and helping build these amazing sustainable cities and help with issues around food security and really providing an opportunity around education and connecting our two people through that as well.
So what's the main focus? Is it attracting investment? Is it infrastructure? Is it trade?
The main focus of our relationship has been around trade, but we do think that there's great opportunities for investment in Victoria as well, especially from the sovereign wealth funds. But to date, it's been very much driven by our relationship with trade and our relationship with international education. Melbourne's the #3 city in the world for international students, and the students really, make up that great story about Melbourne's multiculturalism. We also have been really fortunate that we've had a really strong trade in food and beverage products, and you see so much of our products, when you go to a restaurant or if you go to Spinney's supermarket, you'll see hundreds of Victorian products on the shelf, whether it be Bulla ice cream or cheeses and yogurts. Even the antipasto that is served in their deli is all from Victoria.
What sectors are important to Victoria's engagement with the Middle East?
So Victoria's exports just reached 57.7 billion, which is an all-time high for us. And for the first time, we've seen 46% of Victoria's exports made up by services. So while our trade at the moment here in the Middle East region has been dominated by goods, we still see huge opportunity in some of those service areas. Mining, equipment and technical services is a big area for us. It's great to have that influence in Melbourne with some of those big companies like BHP and Rio headquartered there. And every year we run a big mining conference called IMARC, and it's now at its 6th year. And we've been very pleased to see the largest delegations actually coming from this region. And this year we hosted a government delegation from Saudi Arabia as well.
I know you love all Victorian companies, but are there any standout success stories?
Oh, there's lots. I always kind of think about my experience when I come to Dubai because you feel it from the minute you get on a plane. So you think about Emirates, who's been flying from Melbourne for years now, and the cheese they serve, the feta cheese, is from Yarra Valley in regional Victoria. You get here and you step out of the airport and you're driving down Sheikh Zayed Road, and it's hard to not see some of those big buildings. And the Burj Khalifa, for example, has had a lot of Victorian engineering companies involved in that design.
Now, Victoria is heavily involved in Expo 2020 in Dubai. Can you tell us the nature of your involvement?
This isn't an event just for the region, this is an international event. So for us, it's how do we really raise the profile of Victoria's world-class industry capabilities. We've got Cox Architect, who's designing the Opportunity Pavilion here at Expo. We have Chevello, a fantastic design company in Victoria, who's doing the fit-out for the Australian Pavilion. We even have startups like Rosterfly, who run a volunteering management system, and they will be running all of that for Expo 2020. And then you have companies like Pink Lady, who will be supplying all the apples for the pavilion. So we'll be showcasing the best of Victorian businesses, both big and small, and really hope to make some great connections here.
The UAE attracts more than 10 million tourists each year, and that steady stream of holidaymakers has raised demand for red meat. It's great news for Australian exporters who supply premium-grade beef and lamb to luxury hotels across the Emirates. Let's catch up with one of those exporters that's established a strong foothold here in Dubai. So what does Mawara actually mean?
Mawara is an Aboriginal word for a fella who's always got meat.
So when did you first start exporting? Was it from day one?
Yeah, it was. Our first export was a consignment of chilled lamb up into Singapore. That's where we started, and it quickly grew from there into a number of other Asian markets. We got hit with the Asian currency crisis in the second half of 1997 and early 1998, which was a bit of a shock early up. That immediately forced us to look into other markets, and we expanded into a number of other Asian markets fairly quickly from there.
Is that what led you to the Middle East?
That's what led us to look at diversification strategies very early on. We were supplying a very large hotel chain with a lot of product throughout Asia. They advised us that they were expanding into the Middle East. So we looked at the opportunities there, and that's what drew us to the Middle East.
So what's the nature of your operations in the UAE and in the Middle East in general?
In the UAE, we have our subsidiary Food Source International that is an import distribution business. So we supply it with all its requirements of Australian meat and other products out of Australia, but it acts as a full import distributor. So it supplies down into the Sultanate of Oman from that base. And then our other operations in the Middle East, we have partnerships with independent importer distributors.
You've got a red meat background, but you've diversified beyond meat.
In the early days where we were supplying our importer distributors with our meat range, and they would say, well, can you get us this? Can you get us this? So that allowed us to go out and look to source the best products in other categories. We've had an export arrangement with the likes of Pachuna Seafoods out of Tasmania, where we've handled their ocean trout into Asia for the last 15 years. We do quite a bit of work with other seafood suppliers, mussels, kingfish, oysters. We do a bit of work with the likes of Mandagery Creek venison. We do some high-end cheeses out of Meredith Dairy in Victoria.
So you mentioned the Asian financial crisis. What other challenges do you face at home, like drought, or overseas, like exchange rates?
There's always something. I mean, over the years, we've had SARS, 1, 2, 3. We've had the global financial crisis. We do quite a bit in airline catering. We've had the significant downturn in that after September 11. We've had the currency down to 65, quite a long time ago. We've had it up to 110. We've had it back to the high 60s at the moment. So there's always a challenge. And then on the supply side, you've always got something in Australia. There's droughts, or there's floods, or there's fires. That's presented logistical challenges in terms of truck movements. And as an export business, you have to be very flexible and very fleet of foot in adapting to those things.
Coming up, how the University of Wollongong in Dubai established itself as a leading learning institution. As an oasis in the desert, the UAE sure knows how to get noticed. Just look at Dubai's ever-changing skyline and the developments that redefine luxury. Australian company Caroma is at the forefront of that luxury innovation. Its bathroom technology is like nothing the world has seen, and the 25 million people expected to visit during Expo will soon trial it for themselves. So here we are at Melbourne's Marvel Stadium, and you've got your bathroom innovation installed here. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yes, so as part of the World Plumbing Conference in September last year, we were in discussion with the AFL about some new technology that we had to bring sustainable bathrooms to the next level. So Smart Command was born out of Caroma approximately 12, 18 months ago. So it's an intelligent bathroom solution, an ecosystem of plumbing products that provides data-driven insights.
So how did the company start, and when did you start working offshore?
So the company was actually born in 1941 out of Adelaide through a world's first plastic moulded system. Adelaide had corrosive water and they had trouble with rust corroding the brass fixtures. So the plastic system was moulded and released to the world and resolved Adelaide's problems. And then from there, that became the nucleus of innovation for us, a core value of the business. And then the next major milestone in the innovation was the dual flush system. So the dual flush system was developed by Steve Cummings, our innovation director, who brought that to the market, and it saves approximately a Sydney harbour's worth of water in Australia annually.
So you started in South Australia, the driest state and the driest continent. Now you've taken water sustainability internationally.
Yeah, so water sustainability is our driving force. And we've developed more and more water sustainable fixtures as we've progressed, and Smart Command was the next step for us to be able to understand user behaviour, so then we can in turn optimise water usage.
So what is Smart Command and how does it work?
So it's an ecosystem of plumbing products, wireless technology and a touchless solution where different, markets require different information. So like a stadium like we are here, it's more about user experience, uptime for the fixtures, but also the sustainable part of it where they're understanding how users are using the fixtures. So then we can either provide signage or adapt design to change the way that people are using water and be more efficient in the ways we do it.
So what's your involvement in the Australian Pavilion at Expo?
Smart Command's actually sponsoring the Australian Pavilion for Expo 2020. And as part of that sponsorship, we're delivering all of the bathroom amenities for the project, which will deliver us the data from millions of people through the actual Australian Pavilion.
It might seem that bathrooms are bathrooms, but are there challenges in taking this sophisticated technology offshore?
Yeah, it's funny you say bathrooms are bathrooms because without them, where would we be? Everyone needs a toilet, but with regard to regulation, we're fairly heavily regulated here in Australia and we have very high standards of water authorities. So most of our standards here will be better than most other countries. So regulation-wise, we still have to go through the process of approval, but there's rarely an issue with it.
So what advice would you give other companies about entering partnerships and going offshore?
I'd definitely do your research before you go and establish a contact there that knows the industry and knows your product. They will be able to assist you with expanding your network there.
A little later, we'll get a sneak peek inside the Australia Pavilion as Dubai gears up to host Expo 2020. When it comes to education, the UAE is one of the more mature markets across the Middle East. There are 32 universities in the Emirates and the University of Wollongong is one of them. In fact, its Dubai campus is one of the oldest and most prestigious universities here. So let's go and find out about a pioneering Australian initiative that came to the Gulf way back in 1993. You've been here 26 years now. Tell me about the growth you've seen in that time.
We have actually a picture of Sheikh Zayed Road, which is the main road here in Dubai when the university started, with the two small towers that you barely can see now there. So we've been, I think, growing at the same pace as Dubai. And we enjoyed really the opportunity to be part of that.
The University of Wollongong is well regarded globally. How about here in the Middle East?
I think our reputation in the Middle East is probably our best ambassador. Whenever you go in the UAE and ask about the University of Wollongong in Dubai, you get extremely high recognition of the quality of our graduates and the place they are taken into the public sector and the private sector.
You have a very international campus. Where are your students from?
Our students are from 108 nationalities, so they're pretty much from all over the world. The subcontinent represents 25% of our students. We have students from Morocco, we have students from Nigeria, we have a good cohort of students from Kazakhstan, and we have a very good growing Chinese market for the last 2-3 years. The UAE national represent 12% of our students, heavily concentrated in postgraduate education, but all Arab nationalities around us in the Middle East also are well represented in our student body.
So what's the benefit of them studying here rather than in Australia?
The idea of international education is to bring education closer to people who feel the convenience of staying where they are. That has been very attractive to students in the UAE. Culturally, some of the students would not like to travel. But beside this, University of Wollongong really believes in student mobility, and we offer our students to spend some time in Australia, sometimes in our other location, either be Hong Kong or Singapore, or recently in Malaysia.
How is Australia's global brand in terms of education?
I think it's very positive. As you know, education is the third export of Australia. And from my personal interaction with government and private sector, the brand of studying in Australia or studying with Australian university is highly appreciated. I think it's a very strong brand.
So you're an enthusiastic partner of Expo 2020.
Yep.
What would a university want to achieve in Expo?
This is the first one in the Middle East, and I think for a university, for us as a partner and sponsor of the Australian Pavilion, we aim at showcasing the best that Australia has. The university has some outstanding research in 3D bioprinting, in education, in the next generation of antibiotics, in engineering, in social sciences. So we aim really at representing Australia at the best and making sure the brand of education also of Australia is strengthened.
Still to come, find out how to navigate Islamic culture and customs if you're coming here on business. With all this talk of Expo 2020, let's go and visit the site that promises to deliver a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It will be a 6-month celebration of creativity, innovation and world cultures. Australia's Commissioner-General, Justin McGowan, has the inside scoop. So it's the first Expo in the Middle East. What does Dubai 2020 hope to achieve?
So Dubai has taken it upon themselves to really represent not just Dubai or the UAE, but the region. So they've got high expectations in terms of challenging some of the existing perceptions around the Middle East. And I think that's really admirable. So in terms of projecting Dubai as a global hub on any scale, you know, there's a third of the world's population within a 4-hour flight, 2/3 of the world's population with an 8-hour flight. It's an incredible hub in terms of aviation, finance and services. So it's really about bringing that to the world and challenging the perceptions.
So tell me about the site. It's massive in terms of scale.
This site is huge. You know, if you're out on the Expo site, you'd see 40,000 workers working 24/7. You know, it conjures up images of building the pyramids or something, right? You know, in terms of the scale, it's about 1.8 kilometres wide by about 4 kilometres long. It's about 438 hectares. But to support that visitor profile of around 25 million visitors, it certainly needs to be something of epic scale. We're in the Mobility District, and our theme is Blue Sky Dreaming. And this talks to this ambitious, optimistic nation that we are. We're problem solvers, we're creative, we're innovative. So our objective is really to challenge the perceptions that visitors may have already of Australia. We'll play to some of our strengths, but also we'll enlighten them on things that they may not potentially know.
And if I was an Australian just walking into the pavilion, what would I see? You know?
Yeah, you'd see this fantastic, warm, welcoming, open Australia.
Like Australia itself.
Absolutely. So there's this fantastic terrain with this large cumulus cloud formation, which is synonymous with Australia, and an opportunity to try some of our great produce, experience some great cultural acts and performances. It'll be a very warm, welcoming and open Australia.
As Commissioner-General, what does success look like to you?
So there's traditional metrics, you know, about how many people we get through the door, and we're hoping to have 2.5 million visitors come and visit the Australian Pavilion. There's, you know, exposure through indirect media and nation branding. But personally, it's really about making all Australians proud. We've got an incredible story to tell. It's a very positive story and really seeking to enlighten the world. You know, we'll play to some of our traditional strengths in terms of who we are as Australians, but we'll also give them a perspective of Australia that they haven't seen. So we'll talk about Australia being a great place to visit, so when they're considering their next holiday, a great place to study, when they're considering, you know, whether they send their children off to Australia to study, a A great place to do business, very secure and stable, and a great place for foreign direct investment.
So who are some of the companies involved in the Australian Pavilion?
So this is a really good news story. There's Australian companies involved at every level at Expo. There's ones that have partnered with us in terms of the Australian Pavilion, and there's also Australian companies who are really helping the whole Expo come to life. Because, you know, Australians are known for putting on large mega events. There's lots of Australians that work here that came from the Commonwealth Games in the Gold Coast, as well as the Sydney Olympics. So the companies that we're working with in terms of partnering with the Australian government is Schiavello, who are providing us the furniture, Worley, a significant oil and gas services company. We have Hermal Group, who's providing us all the timber from Tasmania. We have Treasury Wines, which is providing some great Australian wines. And a Western Australian company called Fast Brick Robotics has some fantastic robotic technology that we'll be showcasing here at Expo 2020.
So how can Australian companies get involved in Expo 2020? Just get in touch with you?
Absolutely, and jump on our website or our social media channels. We're here to help.
The United Arab Emirates has grown from a quiet backwater to one of the Middle East's most important economic centres. So let's find out about the local customs to keep in mind when you arrive here on business. So what's the mix between business and leisure travellers at your hotel?
So we currently have about 70% business, FIT business and government business, and 30% leisure.
So what's the usual custom when you're entertaining clients or partners? Do you take them out to a restaurant for a drink? Do you ever get invited to their home?
I think it's quite often that you get invited for business traveler, or even myself, usually get either invited to their office or maybe to a hotel for a meeting. It can be that the meeting is either formal or informal, depending on the situation. The locals may not necessarily be on time, and that's fine. And then when the meeting starts, I think it's quite common that you'll be served Arabic coffee, and the first part of the meeting will focus on driving the relationship. And then eventually after, yourself or maybe your business partner will carry on with the business talk as such. It can happen that you are invited at the home of a local Emirati, especially when it becomes very high-level formal meeting, and if you're dealing with sheikhs, that you could be invited to a palace. But it's still quite, the lesser case.
What are some of the cultural things to remember in the UAE?
I think the culture in UAE is becoming more and more permissive. Of course, there's certain time of the year, such as Ramadan, where we have to be a little bit more careful of local customs. But other than that, it's really easy, and you kind of go with the flow.
So what's the difference between Abu Dhabi and Dubai in terms of the types of business?
Abu Dhabi is represented with all the government entities, business institutions, oil and gas sector, defense, while Dubai is a lot more represented by all the commercial corporations. You've got the Dubai International Financial Center, where a lot of corporations have got their headquarters for UAE and Africa. And so that's how I think you can really define the two cities.
So how do I get around Abu Dhabi in terms of taxi, Uber, public transport?
So Uber is there in Abu Dhabi. Obviously, taxis are very cheap and very convenient. There's no issue with language. So going along in Abu Dhabi is very easy.
So how do you travel between Abu Dhabi and Dubai?
The majority of our business guests will probably rent a car for the day. Uber is also very convenient, but some people even take a taxi because ultimately it's roughly an hour and a half door to door.
So does it operate as two cities or one?
Indeed, it's like having Washington and New York an hour and a half apart, driving distance.
If you have a spare day or two, what are some of the key attractions in the UAE?
It's a good question, especially as a lot of people combine business and leisure while in UAE. It's quite often that they would extend their stay over the weekend. And I think the best place to visit the Grand Mosque is a phenomenal piece of architecture. The presidential palace, located next to our hotel, actually is amazing and has recently been opened to the public. So it's really a novelty in UAE. And then either a desert safari or maybe the Formula One park, which obviously has made Abu Dhabi very famous over the past years.
The UAE has really exploded in terms of Australian trade and investment opportunities. Dubai is the main focal point, but the capital, Abu Dhabi, has plenty going on too. Even the airlines are competing. Emirates, based in Dubai, and Etihad in Abu Dhabi. Expo 2020 will certainly add to the UAE's appeal. So what have we learnt during our visit? Well, this is a very sophisticated, professional and luxurious country. But make sure you get good legal advice about joint ventures and regulation. Islam is both the official and majority religion, so before you come here to do business, you should know that the traditional working week runs Sunday through Thursday. Friday is observed as a day off for prayers. Keep a close eye on Expo 2020, which will foster all sorts of trade and investment opportunities across the Middle East and North Africa. And finally, being a desert climate, it can get up to 50 degrees here in summer. So if you can, visit in winter, but only go out at night, just like the locals do. Well, that's it for this UAE edition of the Airport Economist. See you on our next business adventure together, somewhere around this great globe. I'm Tim Harcourt, and I'm the Airport Economist.